Good morning, everyone. My name is Jade, and I'm an educator for inland fisheries and wildlife and the Maine Wildlife Park here in Gray, where we are presenting from today. Um, just as a reminder, you can send us questions in the chat on the side of the video there. We'll try and address questions at the end of our talk. And you can also let us know where you're watching from. And again, we'll try and get to those questions at the end. So we're here at the Maine Wildlife Park. We have over 30 different species of native Maine wildlife, all of which can't live in the wild on their own anymore. So they live here at the park where we take care of them, and you can come see them and learn about Maine wildlife. Since Halloween is coming right up, though, we want to show you an animal that to some people is a little spooky because it makes a spooky sound at night, and it's kind of a dead giveaway because that animal is walking around right behind me. But we're going to talk about coyotes. Want to play a coyote sound too so you can hear a coyote howl. But I'm sure you've all heard it in the past, especially if you live in rural areas in Maine. You've probably heard these Maine canines howling at night. Here at the coyote closure at the wildlife park, there's one female coyote. She's enjoying some breakfast right now. She has a little bit of chicken in there, which is one of the main things that she gets fed here, but she'll also get some venison and rabbit, and of course, fruits and veggies too, because coyotes don't just eat meat, they also eat some plant-based foods. But she is getting older. She's turning 15 and she's still really healthy and active. So we hope she has a few more years here at the park. But again, she's getting old, but she doesn't act her age. She's coming. So again, that was that spooky sounding coyote call. And coyotes make a lot of different sounds, but we always associate them with that howling noise. But coyotes also will yip and bark and make all kinds of different noises. And I'm hoping today, as we talk about coyotes, specifically the eastern coyote, that you'll learn to love them as much as I do and learn that they're not quite as spooky or scary as they might sound howling at night. So first I want to compare some of the canines that we have here in Maine. Coyotes are the largest of the canine species, but we also have two other canines, the red fox and the gray fox. And red fox are a little bit bigger than gray fox, but they're both quite a bit smaller than coyotes. And I also have some pelts here that we can look at to compare their furs. The first one I want to show you is the red fox, which of course has that very beautiful reddish, cream, sometimes some brown colors in their fur. They all have very big bushy tails, and these tails help serve as like a blanket, especially when it's cold. They wrap it around their bodies and helps keep their faces and bodies nice and warm. So this is the red fox. And then this is the smaller fox. This is the gray fox, a little bit smaller than the red fox usually. They're also a lot darker colored. They still have some red usually on their bellies, around their chin, and on their tails, but most of them is a lot darker. And they're the smallest of the canines that we have in Maine. And then the largest one we have is the eastern coyote. This is an eastern coyote pelt. A lot bigger than the foxes, but still not as big as wolves that we used to have here in Maine that are extirpated now. A little bit smaller than them, but bigger than the foxes and the largest of our canines here. And I don't want to dive too deep into genetics, but there is really interesting stuff happening with eastern coyote genetics. If you're interested and have more time to look into it, I would definitely suggest it, because eastern coyotes are a hybrid species, meaning that they are a new species, but their genetics come from several other species. So eastern coyotes are a mix of even domestic dog, coyote, wolf. They have a lot of mixed genetics, and it's a really cool evolutionary story if you can check out eastern coyote genetics. And we estimate that here in Maine, we have about 10 to 12,000 eastern coyotes. So a very abundant and healthy coyote population here in Maine. They're doing very well. And we have a map here to kind of show how coyotes have expanded across the country. And this was a very natural expansion. As we cleared forests in Maine, and the wolves became extirpated, it really created this perfect scenario for coyotes to move in, as there was more territory for them and less competition for them. So more space and less wolves, that's more resources for coyotes. And they were already kind of moving this way to begin with. So that's why one of the reasons we have so many coyotes here in Maine. As I mentioned before, coyotes are omnivores. They eat both animals and plants. And as being a predator, as being an animal that hunts and catches prey and being a larger animal, we have some mixed attitudes towards predators, and we always have. But coyotes play a really important role in Maine's wild ecosystem. And today we're going to learn about how important they are in Maine and why it's important that they stay here in Maine. So let's talk about some of these adaptations. Coyotes live in the woods, and they are well adapted for living in the woods. They have that thick fur coat that of course helps them stay warm and dry, but it also helps them camouflage. So you can see here, there's one picture from a game camera of a wild coyote, and you can see how well its coat blends into its environment. That is an adaptation for staying hidden and being able to creep up on their prey and also not become prey themselves. And then the other picture is the picture of the coyote here at the wildlife park. Her name is Girly. And you can see, just like a wild coyote, she has a beautiful fur coat, and it helps her camouflage into her pretty natural exhibit that's here at the wildlife park too. I have a few other coats that I wanted to look at here up close so we can look at some other adaptations. One of the first things I want to look at are these legs. Coyotes have really long legs in the front and in the back. And that helps tell us that they are good runners. They spend a lot of time on the move, and they can cover a lot of land. So they have these nice, long, strong legs that help them move around. They also have these nice forward-pointing ears. I have a couple Coyote Mounts too that we'll look at a little bit later, where we can look at their ears and their structure a little bit better than you can with a pelt that doesn't have the muscles and bones and all that still, but you can still tell they have those predator ears and eyes that face forward and point forward for looking for and hearing their prey. I'm also going to take a look at the Coyote Skull. Get this a little bit closer. And first we want to look on top here. This part of the skull on top we call the Sagittal Crest. And that's often seen on predators. It's another attachment on their skull for muscles, and it helps give them a nice strong jaw and strong muscles there. That's called, again, the Sagittal Crest. Now, when we look at the teeth here, again, the coyote is an omnivore. So they really have teeth very similar to ours, because most humans are also omnivores. So the back teeth are really good for chewing up and grinding plants. They're a little bit flatter. Oh, I think my microphone just died.
Oh, we can still hear you though. That's good. We didn't lose you yet.
Okay, good. I think I just got a little beepy tone. And then the front teeth are much sharper. So those are the front teeth that they're going to use for chewing up meat versus the back teeth that are better for chewing up plants. And coyotes target a wide variety of prey. They will eat rodents like snowshoe hare. They'll go after wild turkeys, and they are more successful at hunting deer in the winter. Once the snow gets deep, deer have a harder time moving through the snow, and the coyotes are able to keep up and catch them a little easier. So in the winter, they'll often go after deer a little bit more than they do in the spring or summer, where it's a lot harder to catch a speedy deer. And again, during the summer and fall, they're going to eat a lot more berries, fruits, and nuts. They're a lot more abundant in the spring and in the summer in those warmer months. So they're going to be relying more on some of those plant-based foods while they're available and while they're more abundant. And coyotes are what we call an opportunistic eater. So they are pretty effective predators, but they're also scavengers. They're going to eat foods that something else has already killed because it's a lot easier than hunting and killing your own food. So again, they're going to go for kind of what's easiest. So in different seasons, they're going to go for what's most abundant, what's close by, what's easy for them to get. And deer have evolved as predators in Maine with coyotes very closely. All wildlife species, both predator and prey, are very important for a healthy and resilient ecosystem. So that relationship between them, just like other predators and prey, helps keep the entire ecosystem balanced and healthy. So if you're out and about and you're trying to look for signs of coyotes around, maybe you haven't seen them, but you've heard them, you think, oh, there might be a coyote in this area. I can give you some tips for things to look for. So first off, let's look at some repless scat. Scat is pretty much just a scientific word for poop. So this is a fake coyote poop. And coyotes, because their diet is so varied, their poop is also going to be pretty varied. So it, in general, looks similar to like a domestic dog poop or anything like that. But it's going to change from season to season and time to time with what the coyote's eating at that time. Then I have a track here. This is a coyote track. And I'd like to point out the number of toes here. They have a fifth toe that's up high on their leg, kind of like a domestic dog. But these are the only toes that leave a print. And coyotes also almost always leave their claws in their track. So it's a good way to tell if you're looking at a coyote print versus like often like cat prints, like a bobcat or a lynx or anything like that. They're not going to leave claws usually, but coyotes do. And just for a size comparison, I also have a red fox print here. So when you look at them side to side, you can kind of see the size difference. The overall shape and everything is very similar. You can see that red fox also usually leaves some little claw marks in their tracks and their prints, but pretty different size. Most coyote tracks are about 2 inches wide and about 2.5 inches long. And usually the back foot is a little bit smaller than their front foot. So if you can see their tracks, you can see which is their front and back foot. They also are diagonal walkers. A lot of predator species are diagonal walkers. So they're going to leave their prints in sort of a diagonal line. And we have lots of track resources and everything too online. So if you're interested in more animal tracks, you can check that out on mefishwildlife.com too. They also tend to leave the fur behind from the animals that they consume, like rabbits. There's not a lot of nutrients and stuff in the fur, so they want to get the most nutrients out of it, and they'll leave behind the fur. That's another track you can look for. So things like bones, fur, feathers, all of the less nutrient dense parts of their prey, you can often find around their dens. And you want to be really careful around coyote dens, especially if it's a mom with her babies, because she's going to be protective of those babies, just like most animals. She doesn't want you to harm her babies. So be careful if you're anywhere near or you suspect you're near a coyote den to respect their space. And the spring is the pup rearing season, so that's when it's especially important to stay away. We have lots of other tips for preventing conflict that I'll get into now. Humans, our lives look a lot like an all-you-can-eat buffet for most animals. We have poultry and livestock and pet food and bird feeders and garbage cans and barbecue grills and all these things that smell really good to animals and attract them in. So a lot of preventing conflict is altering the way we're living a little bit so that most predators stay away from your property. One of the best things you can do is if you have poultry, livestock, anything like that, making sure you have predator-proof enclosures. You can find lots of tips and tricks for doing this online. Also storing all of your feed, grain, food, all of that behind closed doors and in animal-proof containers. And all of this is taken directly from our website as well, so you can look at all of these online too as we go along. Another way to prevent conflict is taking care of your trash and being smart about your garbage. This picture represents exactly what you should not do. Making sure that you store your garbage somewhere that is closed up, where animals like bears and fox and raccoons and skunks can't get into your garbage. And then when you do bring your trash out, make sure you have good lids for it. And if you have a curbside pickup, try and make sure your trash goes out pretty close to your pickup time and not like a day or 2 days in advance is always a good idea. You also want to be a responsible pet owner. A lot of people worry about their little pets from birds of prey and other predators. And what we always suggest is keeping your pets updated on their vaccines, keeping your pets leashed and under your control at all times, not feeding your pets outside, and cleaning up after your pets. Don't feed stray animals, feral cats, anything like that. And again, just trying to be responsible and keep an eye on your pet is the best thing that you can do for them. And again, all of those tips and tricks are online, and they should help you live peacefully and happily with wildlife, because that's always the goal. We want to have these animals around for a long time, and it's always great to view wildlife and see wildlife, but doing it from a respectful distance and respecting their space is always best. So what is inland fishery and wildlife's role in Maine coyote population management? So coyotes are considered a fur-bearing species in Maine. So it's a species that people can trap and hunt, and often keep their furs, because on a cold morning like today, especially, this coyote fur is really, really soft and very plush and beautiful. And as much as I love Girly, some mornings I'm like, oh, I could have cuddled up in her fur, but we would never do that with her. And coyote hunting or trapping season is mid-October through the end of December. There's no closed season to coyote hunts. There are some different regulations as far as night hunting and needing permits and all these kinds of things. And all of the hunting and trapping laws are online. So you can go to mefishwildlife.com and check out all of the hunting and trapping laws for many, many different species in Maine and fur-bearing species. And we're always focused on doing more outreach. More outreach and education is needed to promote the benefits of coyotes and coyote management in Maine. Programs like this one today and other programs that biologists are doing all the time throughout the state to promote all of our different species and talking about their role in the ecosystem here in Maine. And all carnivores play an important role in Maine. Coyotes, like I said, they do prey on small mammals and turkeys and all kinds of things like that. They also eat plants. But as a predator, they help control populations. If there's an overpopulation of one species, then it can damage the habitat, spread disease. It can have weakened animals, and we want to keep a strong population. They're also, coyotes specifically, are scavengers. So they help to clean up dead animals and keep our habitats and wild areas clean. And they also help protect the plants in a habitat by controlling the herbivore populations like rabbit and deer that browse on all of the plants in the ecosystem as well. And predators like coyotes enrich and balance Maine's natural ecosystem. That balance, again, is necessary if you want to continue to enjoy Maine's outdoor resources and the natural beauty that's we're so lucky to have here in Maine. I want to take a look at some of the Coyote Mounts over here too. So I am going to turn the camera around. Lower it a little bit too. So this first mount, I wanted to look at, I mentioned their kind of facial features. So those ears that are pointed forwards, the eyes that are pointed forwards. And I want to look at this nice long snout. Coyotes have a really, really good sense of smell. They rely on their smell, their eyesight, and their hearing a lot. So you can see that there on this full coyote mount. Coyotes also tend to carry their tails pretty low and not quite like a fox, but they still have a pretty bushy tail and lots of fur for staying warm and blending in, of course. And the other mount here is pretty unique. This is a melanistic coyote. So it has black fur, very, very dark fur compared to a lot of other coyotes. And being melanistic is kind of like the opposite of being albino. So albino animals lack melanin, they don't have melanin, whereas melanistic animals have an abundance of melanin. So this is a coyote that you wouldn't see too often, but it does just happen naturally due to their genetics. I have one other fur here that's really cool. This is a kind of blonde coyote fur. So when we look at it, especially next to this one, you can see it's much lighter, even has some reddish orange colors in it. And again, because of eastern coyotes' very diverse genetics, they have a very wide range of color variations. So especially if you're able to see coyotes in the wild, you'll probably see a lot of different color variations. Even during the seasons, their fur will change color a little bit in one individual coyote. So lots of cool variations there. I'm going to turn the camera back around now in case our coyote here at the wildlife park makes a reappearance and we can answer some questions as well.
Yeah, we've been getting some great questions and I've been monitoring them here in the office. So I'll scroll back up to the top and get some of them. I've been trying to answer a few as we go, but I'm sure some of you might have some similar questions, and let's just get started. So you mentioned a little bit about Coyote Diet, but could you remind us again, what are some of the things that coyotes like to eat?
Yeah, so Coyote Diet will change a little bit over the seasons. Especially in the spring and summer, they're going to be eating a lot of fruits, berries, nuts, seeds, those kinds of things that they'll graze as they're going along and eating. And if they're going to be eating some meats, they'll eat things like rodents, squirrels, rabbits, chipmunks. They'll eat some turkeys, wild turkeys. We have lots and lots of wild turkeys in Maine now too, so they'll eat that. And then I mentioned, especially in the winter, they'll try and prey on deer more often because it's easier to catch deer in the deep snow when it's harder for the deer to get away. But they're also scavengers, as I said. So they'll also eat animals that have already died or been killed by something else. So really wide range of things that they'll eat. They're, again, an opportunistic eater, which truly means there's not a lot of things they're not gonna eat if it's there for them.
You know, that's great. They really are quite interesting animals, and they'll always find something. So we talked a little bit about when we heard, one of their louder howls. We didn't get to hear any of the yipping calls. But why do coyotes howl? What's the purpose behind that howl?
Yeah, so it's a lot of different communication that's happening in the different sounds that coyotes make. Sometimes it's about territorial calling, so saying, this is my space, this is where I live, stay away. Sometimes in the mating seasons, it'll be to attract mates and to talk to each other to say, hey, I'm over here, and is less about stay away and more about mating and breeding. But they have a very wide range of vocalizations and kind of complicated social structures. So it's really cool to keep learning more and more. And I think it's still kind of a mystery about a lot of animals that we wish we knew what they were saying a lot of the time, but we're slowly figuring out what some of those sounds that they make mean.
I'm sure knowing how to speak coyote would make taking care of Girly there a little easier there, that coyote behind you.
Yeah, and she is a very shy and quiet coyote. Kind of fun fact about her is that one of the only times we ever hear her howl is when emergency vehicles go by the wildlife park. So she loves when she hears sirens, it gets her all excited. But no matter how much kids and families howl at her, she doesn't respond. She's pretty quiet unless she hears those sirens.
Oh, that's funny. Hopefully everyone's saying nice things. Probably have just too much of an accent for her to care what you're howling at her.
Maybe.
Just kidding. All right. So, is a pack of coyotes just called a pack of coyotes, or is there a special name for that?
Coyotes don't tend to travel in packs, really. They're a little bit more solitary. We think of wolves as usually traveling more in groups. Coyotes can even kind of sometimes fake that there's a larger number of them around than there really is. A single coyote will yip and howl and call as if it's a group of coyotes to kind of give the false idea that there's more coyotes to look tougher and stronger.
That's clever.
It is. It's really clever. And again, another example of their wide range of being able to vocalize and make all these different sounds. But most of the time, coyotes travel alone, or sometimes it'll be a female with her babies. But they usually don't travel in like a pack like wolves do.
No, that is interesting to hear. So let's see. Back on the pack thing, you kind of already answered this, that coyotes don't really travel in packs. But if there were some in the pack, what kind of, like, how many would it be? And is it like a mom and her kids, or what kind of thing? If, like, how many would be in a pack?
Yeah, so often if you see coyotes alone, a lot of times it's the males that travel by themselves more. But females will sometimes have maybe another female with them, or her pups or her little ones with her, for often that whole first spring, summer, and into fall too. So usually if you see a group, it's a related group. But again, it's only going to be a couple, like 2-3 coyotes at a time. They really don't travel in big groups like wolves would.
Right. And so it's certain times of years and family groupings, maybe, a couple of females, right, a pup, but not very often. And they probably don't stay together for the whole year. But yes, sometimes that can happen. Mm-hmm. All right. And do you have any idea, like, how long can a coyote live?
Yeah, so I mentioned Girly's getting a little old here at the wildlife park. She's turning 15 this year, which is older for a coyote. But she's living here in captivity where she gets special care all the time. We're always keeping a close eye on her. So she's expected to live longer here than she would in the wild. In the wild, they're probably going to live more like between 10 to 12 years. Getting up to 15 would be pretty old.
That sounds pretty good for a dog.
Yeah, so, it is. It's very similar to like a household dog.
Yeah. So coyotes have a lot of these really amazing adaptations. They can be predators. They eat, plants and meat. Can they hurt people? Is there anything that we should worry about for that? Like if we're out and about in the woods and we hear them, like can they hurt people?
Any wild animal can hurt people. So I think it's always important to give any animal space and respect their space. Coyotes don't go after people. Like even like Girly here at the park, I said she's pretty shy. Most coyotes are not going to want to be close or around people. They're going to want you to stay away. I again want you to be most cautious in the springtime. That's when they have their pups with them. So if you suspect you're anywhere near a coyote den, give them some extra space, even more than you would if she didn't have her pups with her. But overall, it's just like any other wild animal where if you respect their space, they're going to respect your space too.
Yeah, we always want to remind people that, animals sometimes can feel threatened in the same way people are. So again, if you're around their pups or if there's a food source nearby, use your best judgment and leave the space and just be safe. And of course, if you ever think an animal's acting out of characteristically, make sure you, safely leave the area and call somebody and let somebody know, like one of our animal control agents and things like that. There's people who can help if you have questions. But yeah, I mean, and I think even people can say if you feel threatened, this the same kind of thing. Let's see. Do we have a few more questions coming in? So yes, we do know that coyotes. There's a question here about there's the controversy around coyotes. We all love them in different ways, and we all have different opinions on them. Our biologists work really hard to study the coyote populations and all the different wildlife populations here in Maine, and we use biological data to help decide different things like what kind of how much can be harvested in a year safely without harming the population and things like that. And we base our information off of scientific data. So although we might have different opinions on how we all think the coyotes should be treated or whatnot, we here at the department use our biological data to make different decisions and work with the legislature and things like that. So, but they are beautiful animals, and we really appreciate all your questions and interests in these wonderful animals. So we really appreciate it. Oh, another question from a class just popped in. I thought we were almost out. You got a few more minutes if you want to squeak a question in, everybody. Someone would like to know, how big is the territory that a coyote will cover? That's a great question.
That is a good question. I was talking earlier about those long legs that coyotes have, and those are for covering a lot of land. A single coyote can easily cover several miles, especially if they are in an area with less food available. They'll travel pretty far to find food. And for the mating season, they'll travel pretty far to find each other. So they can travel a pretty big distance and move around a lot. They definitely don't tend to stay in one place for long. The exception being when the female will have her pups with her, they'll kind of stay in one spot a little bit longer, but pretty much once those pups can keep up with mom too, they're on the move. So they spend a lot of time moving around.
And we do want to make sure everyone understands that that both parents will take care of the pups as well. I know we keep referring to mom, but I want to make sure we don't leave that out there. The both parents do care for the pups. Let's see, we got another question about pups. About how many babies does a coyote have in a single year?
Yeah, so in their litter, they'll usually have anywhere typically between like 3 to 6 pups. Sometimes it's a little bit lower, like 3 or 4. But they usually have anywhere between 3 all the way up to like 6 at a time. And again, the pups, when especially they're small, they're a lot more vulnerable. So those first year of life can be really hard for a baby animal. So they don't always all make it. So mom has a few or several in the hopes of several coyotes making it on to live up to adulthood.
That's great. And, we're talking about coyotes from a Maine perspective because we are the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. But someone has a question, do coyotes only live in Maine, or where else are they found?
Coyotes are found really across the entire country, and there's different species of coyote. So here in the Northeast, we have the eastern coyote species, but there's also coyotes out west that look different and have different adaptations and behave and live very differently than eastern coyotes. So there are several different coyote species. Here in Maine, we only have eastern coyotes, but eastern coyotes live in the entire Northeast and in other areas of the country.
That's great. And we talked a little bit about genetics. And I do want to remind people there's a lot of information out there about coyote genetics. And I know there's been different information about hybridizations. But Jade, do we have any coy wolves in Maine? I know this is something a lot of times people wonder based off of other things they might have seen, but do we?
Yeah, so eastern coyotes are often referred to as coy wolves, but it's not quite right. The eastern coyote is their very own species. They are their own canine species. It's called the eastern coyote. And again, they do have mixed genetics. They are a hybrid species from many other lines, but they are their own unique species, the eastern coyote.
And I'm assuming that's the same kind of answer based off of like coy dogs is the other word we often hear thrown out when you're talking about coyotes because of their interesting diversity.
Yeah, and a lot more fairly recent research has been done for coyote genetics. There are a few different studies online that you can check out where they took samples and actually really looked deeply into coyote DNA. It's a lot of really good information out there. So I would definitely suggest checking out some of those journals and studies that were done to dive into the science behind coyote genetics. It's really interesting.
Yes, and I did put in a couple of links in this chat that I hope you all go back and check out about our wildlife management reports, as well as a link to a page all about our coyotes here in Maine with some brief information about things like their habitat, their reproduction, and things like that. Um, and then also just to kind of end on this I'm just thinking about coyotes, you know, we've been looking at them. She's probably gone off to take a nap, or maybe she's digesting her snacks from this morning.
Yeah.
But how fast can they run? I mean, when she was waiting for her food out there earlier today, she was probably running around pretty quickly. But are coyotes fast runners?
They are pretty quick, and they can travel at like a trot or a jog for a pretty long distance. They're not going to be able to like sprint for a long time, but they'll kind of trot along and jog along for quite a while. So they move pretty quickly. Um, but again, if they're moving at their very fastest, it's going to be for a shorter amount of time than if they're sort of just trotting or jogging along.
That's still pretty good. I can imagine them running across the landscape. That's fun.
Yeah,
All right, so I'm just
yeah.
going to take just two more questions here. But again, you can always email us later if you have more questions, and we'd be happy to get back to you with answers. Um, so talking about coyotes as a predator in Maine, you know, they're obviously part of the food chain, part of the ecosystem. Um, are they a keystone species? And what exactly does that mean to be a keystone species?
So, a keystone species is typically a species that we think of as having a very vital role in the ecosystem. And really, every species in the ecosystem is important and serves a role, but there are some that help support specific habitats and really bolster other populations pretty drastically. So, coyotes are not considered usually a keystone species. Um, their diet and everything is like so diverse, and their whole way of living is so opportunistic and diverse. So, they'll cross different habitats and live in lots of different areas. So, um, they're not, I don't think, specifically a keystone species. But we do have some keystone species in Maine, like the North American beaver is thought of being a keystone species for wetland habitats, especially. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you'd like to know more about that, I can put the link in the chat again right now to go ahead and send us an email. And, you know, we can often send questions to our biologists when we need more information or you'd like to know a little bit more. We try to do our best to always get you the right information through these presentations, but sometimes a little more information is needed. So please feel free to email us and we'll get that on to our biologist as well. All right, so lastly, we talked a lot about their amazing adaptations. And I'm really curious, what do you think is the most important adaptation or sense? You know, there's great hearing and sight and smell. What do you think is their most important one? I mean, they're a dog, so I mean, I like to lean
Yeah.
towards smell, but what do you think?
I agree with you. I even just watching Girly's behaviors here at the wildlife park, she relies really heavily on her sense of smell. And a part of that is marking and scent marking. So she does a lot of scent marking in her exhibit here at the wildlife park, and wild coyotes do that a lot too. They rely heavily on their sense of smell for marking their territories, for communication. and for finding their food. So I'd agree with you. I think that their sense of smell is what's most important and what they utilize the most.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, really interesting. So many wonderful animals here in Maine. So that is it for our questions. But again, please feel free to email us if you have more questions or reach out to us at any time.
Yes, thank you all for joining us this morning. I've loved talking with you all about coyotes, and I hope that you will visit the coyote here at the wildlife park. We're closing pretty soon. We are only open through Veterans Day, November 11th. So hopefully you can come visit us before then, and if not, we'll see you in the spring. And yes, you can always visit us online too at mefishwildlife.com and mainewildlifepark.com. If you have any other questions or want to look at other resources, there is an abundance of resources on there.